Last year, there was a lot of talk about Tesla stock being added to the S&P 500 index fund. In today's video, I want to talk about the future of Tesla stock and if it could be added to the S&P 500. I also want to discuss what might happen to the stock if it is added to the S&P 500. I'm Jonathan Stewart, and welcome to Cleanerwatt. So here at the beginning of the video, I want to take just a moment to talk about what is the S&P 500 in case you're watching this video and you're not familiar with stock market terms, including the S&P 500. So simply put, the S&P 500 run by Standard & Poor, meaning that's why it's the S&P, that's where the S&P comes from. It's a weighted index, a market capitalization weighted index fund of the 500 largest U.S. publicly traded companies. And so simply put, Standard & Poor takes the top 500 companies in their list and they weight them based on the market cap as a ratio compared to all the rest of the market caps of all the companies combined. What's important about this particular index fund is it does actually cover, because of the 500 largest companies, they're taking a swath of these very large companies. It actually makes up for 70 to 80% of the total U.S. stock market capitalization, meaning if you were to add up all the market cap value of the top 500 companies and compare that to the rest of the stock market, it would include 70 to 80% of the stock market, meaning it's a very good indicator of how the stock market is doing in general, and it is something that a lot of people watch. Now, why this is important is multiple reasons, and we'll talk about those near the end of the video. But really, why we're talking about it in this video is because there are the many funds that mirror the S&P 500 that actually purchase these stocks to mirror the S&P 500. And so when the S&P 500 adds a new company to this index fund, that means that stock gets purchased by a lot of companies, and that's why it can affect stock price. And so that's really what we want to talk about today, and that's why I believe you're here watching this video. Now, if Tesla were to be added right now, and obviously we'll talk about what they need to be added and if they're missing anything, but if Tesla were to be added right now, they have a market cap of $63.34 billion, again, as of November of 2019. They would be number 97 on the list of the top 500. So they would be doing pretty well. They'd be in that top 20%. They would be 97 right after Morgan Stanley. And of course, Morgan Stanley is a well-known brand and a large brand. And so that kind of puts it in perspective of where Tesla is as compared to other large companies in the United States. Now, what are the requirements? So if Tesla is going to be added to the S&P 500, what do they have to do in order to get considered for the S&P 500? First of all, it must be a U.S. company. The market cap must be over $5.3 billion. They must have at least 50% of the outstanding shares that are public, meaning they can't be more than 50% of the company can't be privately held shares. It must have positive reported earnings in the most recent quarter as well as over the 4 most recent quarters, and the stock must have an active market and must trade for a regional share price. Now, please note that just because a company meets this criteria does not necessarily guarantee that it will join the S&P 500. This is just the minimum required to join the S&P 500. Now, we'll talk about where Tesla is and the requirements and where they might be in the future, but I thought this was interesting. I was pulling up data from last year when this conversation was being brought up more often, and I found an article from Clean Technica, which I will put in the description if you're curious to read the whole article. But I pulled this one quote from the Clean Technica article that was put out November 12th of 2018, so basically just slightly over a year ago. And they said this quote, talking about what could happen to Tesla stock if it was added to the S&P 500. They say here, for many companies, the S&P 500 inclusion results in a modest bump upwards in stock value, something along the lines of 5%. This increase comes as funds that are indexed to the S&P 500 acquire shares of the new company in order to reproduce the index's contents. And then they mention in a recent instance of the S&P 500 inclusion, when Twitter was added to the index, we saw nearly a 5% jump in the stock price on the day of the inclusion was announced. And then over the next 2 weeks, Twitter added a total of about 20% to its stock price. So they mentioned their Twitter as an example, immediately seeing a 5% jump, and then over the next coming weeks, 2 weeks, they say it saw about a 20% increase. So that's one example of what happens in the short term with a stock. But I want to talk about more slightly in the long term. So let's look at the stock ticker for Twitter, and you'll see that it was added to the S&P 500 June 7th of 2018. And so I pulled up the 5-year view here on the stock ticker, and you see there on June 1st, it was at $36.65. On this macro view, it didn't let me go down to the specific day, the 7th, but you can see roughly there in that time period, it was in the mid 30s and $35, $36, $37 per share. If you go to when I pulled this data, November 15th of 2019, then the stock was actually down to $29.25. So while you saw some initial jump of the stock and you saw some initial increases, you can see there, as all stocks do, up and down, but you'll see a recent downturn of the stock. So on the short term, you saw some gains, but on the very, very long term, you're actually seeing a 20% or so loss in share price. We'll talk about another company. So a more recent company added. Just last month, there was a company called Las Vegas Sands Corp. And this company was added on October 3rd of 2019. So you can see the day before there, Wednesday, October the 2nd, the share price was at $56.50. When I pulled this as of market close November 15th of 2019, it was up 10.9% or $62.67. And so that's a 10%, almost 11% short gain over this period of time over those past months. So you can see there was a trend there for the positive. Now, one other company I want to talk about, and then we'll go further into Tesla, is in a company that was added right before the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, and that's NVR here. And you'll see that it was added September 26th of 2019. So on the 25th, their share prices were at $3,575 each. They're now at $3,595. So a little bit of an increase, which calculates out to about 0.5% up over a month and a half period of time. So you'll see there is a broad spectrum of what the stocks can do short term and long term with being added to the S&P 500. When could Tesla be included? Well, you'll notice when we went over the requirements, it has to be a U.S. company, more than 50% of the share price has to be publicly available, and the different things that it met, having a market cap over $5.3 billion. These things are all met. But the one thing that Tesla has not been able to do on a 4-quarter basis was to have positive reported earnings. Now, Tesla just reported Q3 2019, and they did have a good positive earnings of $143 million GAAP profit. And so they are now back on track, getting to a point where they could be considered for the S&P 500. But that is the one thing that they are missing, is those positive reported earnings in the last recent 4 quarters. So in order to figure out when Tesla might be officially added to the S&P 500, or at least considered for that, we have to look at how they can reach this profitability over the trailing 4 quarters. And so you'll see here over the last 4 quarters that have been reported, of course, fourth quarter 2018, you saw that profit of $139 million, which was a good quarter. And of course, you saw a little bit of a loss there, I should say, a pretty big loss of $702 million first quarter of 2019. And really, this was attributed to many things, including the fact that the U.S. full tax credit of $7,500 expired after the fourth quarter of 2018. So you saw Tesla drawing everything they could to pull a lot of that demand to the fourth quarter of 2018. And so when you came to first quarter of 2019, that demand had all been pulled forward to that previous quarter, and so they had less cars to sell. They had less people wanting the cars because of those reasons. Of course, second quarter 2019, you saw a loss. But then this most recent quarter, they got back on track. They have more operating efficiencies. They're doing a lot of really good things with the company, and I had a video that actually talked about these results, and I can link that in the description below if you're curious to watch that video where I talked about what the analysts got wrong in the third quarter of 2019 because they predicted another loss for Tesla, but Tesla instead posted a profit of $143 million. That, of course, starts them on that path once again of the trailing 4 quarters of positive earnings, including the most recent quarter. And so what has to happen for Tesla in the future to get added, and when could this be possible? Of course, we need to get positive in the earnings for the next 4 quarters. I think, based on a video that I mentioned, will Tesla be profitable in fourth quarter of 2019? I put forth a case where it's very possible that Tesla could be positive $307 million in the fourth quarter of 2019. If they were able to do that, plus be positive of $100 million plus or more, roughly, it would take a little less than that. If they could be positive there as well, that would actually put them, since the last 3 quarters would be positive, and that would counteract the negative of the previous quarter, Q2 of 2019, that would actually put them at a trailing profit over the last 4 quarters and the most recent quarter, if that would be fourth quarter 2020, and that would allow them to be considered for that. And so my prediction, and I really think this is very possible, and I think this will happen, is that they will be positive income, GAAP income on the fourth quarter of 2019. That'll be $307 million roughly is my guess. I haven't really done the numbers to see what I think first quarter of 2020 will be yet, but I do believe that it'll be positive, and I just put the minimum there kind of to put them over that top there, and that would be somewhere around $100 million, maybe slightly less to just eke by. But I think, for the S&P 500 to add them to the list, since it's not a guarantee, I think they need to really overdo it a little bit. So at least 100 million. I think it's very possible they could have, several hundred million there in profit, even on a tough period of the year when usually income is down. I still think they can do it because of all the exciting things they're doing. But my prediction is that sometime during Q2 of 2020, Tesla could be added to the S&P 500. Now, really, what would this mean for the stock? As we mentioned previously in the video, it could mean that Tesla would see a short-term gain of 5 to 20%. That's very possible. And for some day traders out there, that might be exciting news, and there might be some ways to benefit on that. Honestly, I'm not about day trading, and I don't think that's necessarily an amazing idea. I'm in for the long haul on a stock like Tesla, and I'm in for what they're going to do in the future and the coming years, not in the coming quarters. And I think that's a good way to invest in a company like Tesla. So while there might be potential short gains of 5 to 20%, does this really matter for the long-term investor? Well, that particular aspect doesn't. But what does matter for the long-term investor is that it does increase the company's and the stock's credibility. So when you get added to a prestigious list and a prestigious index like the S&P 500, it helps people feel stronger about investing in the company. It helps them feel a little safer, and it gets added, of course, to different mirror funds that mirror the S&P 500, etc. But it does increase that stock credibility. It also helps defeat the bears case. So as you know, if you pay attention, there are a lot of bears out there on Tesla stock saying that they're going to go bankrupt, that they don't know what they're doing, etc., etc. Of course, a lot of negative press goes out, and we talked about that in a recent video as well. But this could lead to a lot less shorting of the stock, meaning it wouldn't make any sense to short the stock. You wouldn't really be able to come up with a good case of shorting the stock for a while unless Tesla just started doing really badly, because they would be added into the S&P 500. That would show some credibility, some third-party credibility for the stock. So this is kind of my opinion here. Once again, anything that we mention in this video, this is not investment advice. This is just simply my opinion on the stock. Don't base your decision based on what I say if you want to invest in Tesla stock or not. Do your own research, talk to your own investment professionals, make the decision for yourself. But these are my opinions, and in no way am I telling you to go out and buy or sell any of these stocks. This is not an offer for securities. And, this is just, once again, my opinion. But thank you so much for watching this video. I am very excited about Tesla stock. I think there are great things for Tesla stock in the future. And I think this is a very exciting company, a very exciting stock. If you are already subscribed to my channel, thank you so much for that. If you are not already subscribed, please click the subscribe button so you'll know when new videos come out. And please leave a comment below. I love to hear from the community that I'm building, and I love to hear from you guys what your opinions are on this. Let me know what you think about my predictions, what you think will happen if and when Tesla is added to the S&P 500. Thank you so much.